This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Well, hello there and welcome to the show. All right, I admit it. I held my nose and I jumped feet first into the septic tank of last night's debate on ABC. Am I proud I did it? No, not really, but I have to admit the morbid curiosity of how's it going to go with this presidential debate between Kamala and Trump. And, you know, it had its moments. There were a couple times I laughed out loud, and there was a lot of time that I spent cringing, and I mean on both of their parts, for the down and dirty. Okay, I'll just get right to it. I don't think anybody's mind was changed. So if I had to score, well, who do you think won the debate? I would call it a draw in the sense that I don't think anybody who was sitting on the fence about either one of these candidates decisively had, oh, well, there's good reason why I should have to vote for one or the other. Kamala Harris was, she was herself. And the fact that she had basically two tag team partners who kept tagging in with the moderators, I've seen some bias on the part of moderators before, but as one person so indelicately put it, this was not a debate. This was a gangbang. It was 3 against 1, and Trump had some fine moments, but doggone it, his ego is his worst enemy. And once his ego got involved, he was more defensive. He was more blustery. It was more, I am this and I am that, and people agree that I'm the greatest at this. And anyway, that's where I think some real opportunity was lost. That could have been spent, simply pinpointing, hey, here's where the current administration has failed. Here's another place they've failed. You say you're going to do all these things. You're in power right now. Why aren't you doing them now? So for what it's worth, that's my down and dirty take. Now, I'm going to start with the article of the day because I shared yesterday the question about the debate. So what exactly are we arguing about anyway? That was an essay from Quoth The Raven, or QTR, and their Substack. This article is also by QTR. And I thought this was interesting. The title is, Tonight's Debate Will Backfire Horribly for Both Kamala Harris and ABC. And here's the thinking. Enjoy the visceral response today. Basically, look, the Democrats are going to be spiking the ball today. Oh, she did it all. She rattled Trump, and she held her own with the help of a couple of babysitters. Yes, and Trump was on the defense more than he needed to be. But QTR says the critical thinking actually starts today. So yes, during the heat of battle, there was that sense of, wow, Kamala's doing much better than people thought. But looking beyond the candidates, who, again, likely didn't change anybody's minds, there was something else that was on display, and this could be a very key turning point for a number of people, and that is the incredible bias, the dirty tricks of the moderators. It was undeniable. I mean, when Trump would say something, the moderators would come right back and fact-check him before moving on and tossing a softball to Kamala Harris. Kamala, on the other hand, made she made a handful of just blatantly false statements. The fine people on both sides myth, it's been debunked. Even Snopes, which is pretty partisan, information source, notwithstanding they're the debunkers of myths out there, but even they admit, no, Trump was not praising neo-Nazis. I think she also used the bloodbath. He says there's going to be a bloodbath as soon as he becomes president. And again, taken out of context. He was talking about economically. If I'm not elected, it's going to be a bloodbath. The economy is going to be run into the ground. Kind of like it is right now being run into the ground. But there was no fact-checking. Not for Kamala. It was so interesting to see that happen. And yet there was no pretense. There was no sense of trying to be balanced in any way. So Trump, rightly was probably rattled. He was, after all, debating 3 people, not just one. But for people who are capable of paying attention and trying to suss out truth from error, this was actually a really prime opportunity. Okay, this is me justifying as I climb out of the septic tank that we dove into to watch the debate last night. Yes, I may stink, but you know what? We've confirmed. The media, the legacy media, is not a reliable source of information. They've lost significant credibility with independent and moderate voters. Think about how they were covering for Joe Biden in the midst of obvious moral and mental decline. Now, QTR actually wrote about it a couple of months ago in an article titled, "We Can Be Lied To About Anything." So his point is simply this. After tonight, when the average critically thinking independent or moderate voter starts to get out of the visceral reaction of who won the debate, the picture will start to come into focus. And that picture will be a news network that constantly tried to fact-check Donald Trump, despite Kamala Harris repeating multiple debunked conspiracy theories. And when the average critically thinking American looks at the veracity of the lies that Harris put forth last night, including lies about Trump's stance on in vitro fertilization, lies about Trump being associated with Project 2025, lies about Trump not wanting to secure the border, it's not going to be as easy to spin this as, well, that was a huge victory for Kamala. By the way, she's asking for another debate. She's feeling pretty cocky. So QTR says, despite her being well-seasoned in her narrative and her answers and obviously being prepared to answer questions she may or may not have received in advance, while also benefiting from two friendly moderators and a question format that constantly pinned Trump as the antagonist before David Muir would lead Harris to her answer to reaffirm what the moderators had already decided. Somebody gave the example last night of Trump is literally the embodiment of Hitler. Ms. Harris, would you please describe for us how evil is Trump? I mean, that's the kind of questioning that they were setting her up for. But she wouldn't answer the questions on her flip-flopping policies. No detail on her flip-flops about fracking or her performance as the border czar. She took no accountability for what took place in Afghanistan while simultaneously admitting she approved of how it took place. So QTR says, in my opinion, the debate last night will be just another example of a constantly evolving populace seeing the left-wing media for exactly what it is, and that is an arm of the Democratic Party. And despite some mumbles and grumbles from the Republican side of the aisle tonight, he says, as soon as the debate ended, I reaffirmed to myself, my trust in the American people is that they will think for themselves and they will see tonight for what it was in hindsight. It was a setup. In fact, he says, I honestly believe that the rise of alternative media in this country and the legacy media's track record of horrific embarrassments like covering up the Hunter Biden laptop story, lying to the American people about the mental acuity of President Joe Biden. We've built up a BS tolerance for media spin in the average American. And many people today know the left-leaning media has a narrative and lies to them. More people know that more than ever. So this debate is going to be different from other ones because eventually it'll be looked at in that context. And when people go back and watch how the moderators constantly argued the merits with Trump while leading Harris in her answers to multiple questions, this debate will be revealed for the biased farce that it was. And QTR says, then mark my words, it will do more harm than good for Kamala Harris. In fact, he warns Kamala, I'd be careful about what you wish for if you're asking to step into the ring for a second debate, because ABC's dirty tricks are being scrutinized right now, and they'll be off the table in any future debates. Just because the judges saw round one with Trump as a draw doesn't mean you can go the distance and win by decision. So for what it's worth, there's kind of a nice breakdown of the debate. Again, I don't think it changed anything. More than anything, I was just hoping to see Kamala have a come apart, kind of like Joe Biden did. It didn't happen. That was disappointing. But the fact that they had to have three people debate Donald Trump, that's a pretty good indicator that Kamala's campaign is on the ropes. Now the question is going to be who was fooled. I'm hoping that I wasn't fooled. It's not like I have all the answers, but I like to believe I'm paying pretty serious attention and asking the right questions. I believe you probably are as well. All right, let's move on. Let's move on to something of substance, shall we? Finding freedom in an unfree world requires becoming very committed to the concept of decentralization. I actually shared a commentary yesterday on my Hide in Plain Sight program, which, if you haven't checked out, can I encourage you, if you just need like a little daily kick in the seat of the pants to give yourself some reassurance and a little daily reality supplement, go to the 527alliance.substack.com. There you will find Hide in Plain Sight. It's right there, on the landing page, right in the middle, under the title. And you can kind of click on this and see for yourself. You can subscribe if you'd like. In fact, you want to be a donor, you can be a donor as well. Russ Anderson and I have put together this website of news and information that is designed to bring more light than heat. And I think we're doing a pretty good job. I still bring a fair amount of heat to this podcast, but that's, I guess, an old habit that's hard to break. And there's some things that I talk about here that I don't cover, in Hide in Plain Sight. But nonetheless, the one that I shared yesterday was about peace through personal secession. And I think this is really important because if you're serious about becoming free, at some point you are probably going to have to choose to step away from or withdraw your consent from people or systems that are trying to rule your life or exercise political power over you. Bad ideas, as Jeff Deist puts it, run the world, but must they run your world? The idea isn't that you need to go to war with whoever's trying to rule you. No, you don't. You just figure out how to remove yourself from their political control. And disconnecting from the systems and the people who want to rule you is a peaceful way to take yourself out from under their oppressive power. Now, if you're serious about it, you've got to think about it in terms of centralization and decentralization. That's actually what you're looking for. So here are 6 reasons that centralization is bad, according to the great Paul Rosenberg. He says a friend contacted him looking for an article that explained why centralization is bad. And Paul says, well, at first I was sure there had to be many, but he said, I came up dry. So he sat down and wrote a few reasons. He says the odd thing about centralization is that people expect its bad aspects to be external things like economic issues, but those aren't the essentials. If the internal effects of centralization were recognized and if we did something about it, the outer problems would vanish soon enough. So since everybody expects economic reasons, he says, I'm going to start there. Number 1, centralization disrupts price discovery. Now, that sounds exotic, disrupting price discovery. But he says what it means is this. Whenever centralized power decides to meddle, whether in commerce, large sections of the marketplace are thrown out of order. Now, the biggest offenders in this area were the 20th century's socialist states. Paul says, I'm not sure how many people died, mainly of starvation from their economic experiments, but that number is in the range of 100 million or more. So prices aren't just numbers, is his point. You see, they're crucial information. How many separate prices, for example, go into the delivery of a pencil to your local store? Wood, graphite, lacquer, the pigment for the lacquer, the machines that mix and apply the lacquer, the machines that cut the trees into small pieces of wood, the trucks that move the materials, the cost of hiring the drivers, the cost of the tires, and so on at great length. Once the political boss says pencils should cost X, all those costs are pushed and shoved accordingly. Changes have to be made, corners are cut, scrambles for extra few cents begin. The process is disrupted, and you can be sure that the quality of pencils will decline. Fewer will appear, and the various suppliers will fight like crazy. So in the end, this delivers big problems, like the aforementioned starvation. And it wasn't the bosses who starved, it was the poor and the powerless, precisely the people whom the bosses swear they love and serve. Number 2, he says centralization robs you. Centralization creates a large and growing set of people who eat and generally grow rich at the expense of everyone else. Every dollar that goes to Capital City is money that is extracted from you and your neighbors, diminishing you and your families. I know that's got to hurt some feelings. That probably ruffles a few feathers. Well, what about, people at the local level? Look, I want good people serving in local government. But let's stop pretending that every dime spent by government is money well spent, because a lot of it isn't. And when you get up to the federal level, there are an awful lot of people who have really done very well for themselves without creating the slightest bit of value for other people, other than the special interests to whom they are selling political favors. Though they've created a lot of value for them, which is why they are so handsomely paid and why their net worth soars in spite of a relatively paltry salary as a member of Congress. Interesting. Paul says, number 3 reason why centralization is bad: central bosses try to show they're necessary. You ever notice that politicians are forever creating new fears? And why? Because solving those fears, even if they're mostly imaginary, makes them seem necessary. We have to remind these people why they need us. And Paul says from this we get any number of disasters. Fear sells, war is a tremendous spectacle, and it all makes the centralizers look necessary. Too bad about all those dead guys. Number 4, he says centralization limits you. Centralized power solving our fears requires an ever-increasing number of laws. And each law is a restriction of some kind, so pretty soon you can't do half the things you could do a couple of decades before. There's a law for every problem, a department to enforce it, address it yourself, and you're likely to be labeled a lawbreaker. Think about the lady I was telling you about last week who was arrested for offering to drive people or drop them off at Burning Man. Tens of thousands of dollars of fines because she broke the law. How? By not asking for permission and paying the government for that permission to drive somebody somewhere they wanted to go in return for a fee. Oh, you can tell me, Brian, when you enter commerce, you agree to play by the rules. It's not a crime. For it to be a crime, there has to be a victim. And there was no victim except the lady who was hauled in and then thoroughly squeezed for every penny they could get out of her by the state. So spare me the outrage about, we all have to play by the rules. If those rules are set up to create criminals out of thin air, those are pretty sucky rules. Sorry, but they are. Paul says, so to keep us safe from our professionally cultivated fears, your older aunt can't watch the neighbor kids. Getting into a new business involves insurmountable legal obstacles, and God help you if you give a lost child a ride home. Centralization is a straitjacket restraining not just our bodies, but also our souls. Number 5, he says centralization kills cooperation. Now, there are rules for everything. So you can no longer cooperate with your neighbor because you enjoy it. No, you cooperate because it's commanded, and you'll be punished if you don't. Have you noticed people yearning for the old days and talking about small rustic communities where people still look out for each other? Well, they're right to yearn for that because it's a very healthy way to live, and it's centralization that stole it from us. By the way, I don't mean to flex. I'm not trying to brag about how awesome my life is compared to yours, but one of the greatest blessings of life that I am currently enjoying is to live in a community where people look out for each other. My landlord is in charge of thousands and thousands of acres of farmland here in southern Idaho and tells me, as long as you're living here in this home that I'm renting from him, he says, you'll never want for potatoes. And by the way, he dropped some off over the weekend. Holy smokes. Fresh from the ground, #1 Idaho bakers. I mean, the most beautiful russets I've seen in a long time. We baked them up and had quite the feast on Sunday. And in return, guess what I got to do? I got to take some fresh eggs from my hens over to him and his family. Because we live in a society, a culture here in this rural area, out in the sticks, where people look out for each other. And it is a very healthy way to live. And I consider myself an extremely fortunate individual to be in that circumstance. Blessed is actually the word I would use. Number 6, centralization robs you of self-worth. Paul says, consider what happens inside you when you help people because you, by yourself, care. You know you did a good thing. You feel good about yourself. You become a better, happier, more beneficial person. Every time you do the right thing because it's mandated by law, you are being robbed of self-worth and self-improvement. And your friends and neighbors are robbed of your improved state. How are you being robbed? Because you're being forced rather than choosing it voluntarily. Can you see the difference? So Paul asks, have we had enough? Maybe you've thought of some items that could be added to the list, but at least these 6 are a good start. Bottom line is, centralization is anti-human. It's the enemy of innate goodness and progress. And what supports centralization is a steady stream of fears, most of which are imaginary. And so he asks, can we ditch this? Can we start living as adults? Have we had enough? I'll leave that up to you to answer as you see fit. By the way, I'm including one other article that I hope you'll check out in my show notes today at thebryanhydeshow.com. This one is from Brandon Smith. Excellent information on how the move toward total censorship is approaching. It's accelerating. And with it comes our duty to rebel against that censorship. Brandon always has a very solid take on everything that he writes. So I'm including this in today's show notes. These are the show notes for September 11th, 2024 at thebryanhydeshow.com. Thanks again for tuning in. I hope you found something of use in today's program.
This is The Bryan Hyde Show.